I want you to picture a scene. It's early morning. The sun is just starting to come up over the horizon. The air's cold, maybe a little bit of mist on the ground.
Okay.
A man is walking down a dirt path, and in his hand, he's swinging a bird cage. Inside, there's a partridge, a shokor, the source calls it. Now, you have to remember, biologically, this thing is a wild animal.
Right. It's built for the sky.
It is engineered by millions of years of evolution to fly, to hunt, to be, a functional part of the ecosystem.
It's a creature of the open air. Its whole being, its bone structure, its feathers, its instincts, everything is designed for boundless space.
Exactly. So the man stops. He sets the cage down in the tall grass.
Yeah.
He unlatches that little wire door. He steps back. He is literally handing this creature the one thing that every living thing is supposed to want more than anything else.
Freedom.
Freedom, the ultimate prize.
The thing wars are fought over.
Yeah.
Like the thing people die for.
But here is the glitch in the matrix. The bird doesn't fly away. The man starts walking away, whistling maybe, and the bird, it panics. It hops out, sure, but it runs after the man.
It chases him.
It chases the cage. The source material for today describes this heartbreaking detail where the bird actually catches up to the man, it climbs onto the closed cage, and it starts pecking at the wire mesh. It's trying to break back in.
That is a profound and deeply disturbing image. It's fighting to return to its own incarceration.
It's begging for the safety of the prison.
Wow.
It's fighting to get back in the box. And that image, that single image, is the anchor for everything we are talking about today. It forces us to ask a question that makes us, really uncomfortable. Is freedom actually natural? Or is there a point where the human mind, like that bird, gets so rewired by oppression that it starts to view the cage as safety and the sky as a threat?
You've just hit on the absolute central thesis of our deep dive today. We are looking at what I would call the sociology of sovereignty. And honestly, this isn't just about birds. This is about how entire civilizations function. Or, well, how they malfunction.
And the stack of papers you've brought, I started reading this last night and I had to put it down and just walk around the room a few times. We're looking at a synthesis of lectures by the scholar Allama Ghulam Ahmad Parvez, mixed with some really dense, really fascinating notes on a systems-level interpretation of the Quran.
And I want to be really clear right off the bat, because I know the phrase religious text can trigger a certain expectation in people's minds.
Right, they think they know what's coming.
Exactly. This is not a sermon. If you're listening to this expecting a guide on how to pray or how to fast in a ritual sense, you are in the wrong place. This text analyzes religious scripture as a manual for the psychology of nations.
It really does. It treats these stories not as ancient history or some kind of fairy tale, but as data points. They're data points in a huge study of how civilizations rise and how they crash.
It felt more like reading a manual for an operating system than a theology book. It's talking about cause and effect, social laws, political structures. It's incredibly analytical.
It is. The mission of this deep dive, then, is to move entirely beyond that traditional idea of religious ritual. We are looking at what the source calls the universal laws of rise and fall.
Precisely. The argument here is that just like there are laws of physics, gravity, thermodynamics, there are laws of history, and if you violate them, you crash. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how holy you think you are.
And the core thesis here is heavy. It's really heavy. It basically argues that freedom isn't a gift you just hand someone. It's a burden. And if a people have been enslaved for too long, their actual neurology, their psychology gets rewired.
It creates what the source calls the slave mindset.
Right. And once that mindset sets in, the source argues that you cannot just liberate them. You can cut the chains, you can open the door, but like that bird, they are incapable of sovereignty. They literally cannot function as free people.
Not without a total generational reset.
A total reset. It's a fascinating, if somewhat ruthless sociological argument.
It is. Now, before we really unpack this, we should probably talk about our sources. We have transcripts, we have historical analysis of the Israelites, the Bani Israel, and we have these recursive memos that treat the text as a kind of civilizational operating system.
And a quick disclaimer before we jump in, we are reporting on the arguments found in these specific texts. The source material draws some very sharp, very direct parallels between the history of the Israelites and the modern state of Pakistan. And it critiques both heavily.
It frames the Israelite experience not just as their story, but as a mirror for modern nations.
So we aren't taking sides politically here. We're just here to explore this fascinating historical and psychological diagnosis that the text lays out.
Exactly. So let's go back to that bird, the bird pecking at the cage door. Why does it do that?
It's such a disturbing image because it goes against everything we think nature is. We think nature is freedom. We think every living thing wants to be free. But the source material argues that for the Israelites, and by extension, any long subjugated people, the cage becomes their comfort zone.
And this brings us right to Section 1, the psychology of slavery. The source focuses on the story of the Israelites right after they escape Pharaoh. They've crossed the sea, the oppressor is gone. They are, for all intents and purposes, physically free.
So the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea, Pharaoh is gone, the entire army of their oppressors is at the bottom of the ocean. Technically, they are free, but this is where the source material argues the real problem begins. Because physically, yeah, the chains are off, but mentally.
Mentally, they are still clocking in at the brick factory. Their bodies are in the Sinai Desert, but their minds are still in the suburbs of Cairo.
And what's the first thing they do? They don't celebrate. They don't start drafting a constitution or, training a militia. They start a protest.
To protest.
And the specific demand they make to Moses is, honestly, it's hilarious. If it wasn't so tragic, they don't ask for swords. They don't ask for blueprints to build a city.
They ask for groceries.
They ask for groceries. They specifically say, we missed the cucumbers, we missed the garlic, we missed the lentils and the onions.
It sounds so trivial, right? Like they're just hungry. A traditional reading might just say, oh, the poor dears, they just wanted a decent meal after all that.
Sure, give them a break.
But the source argues this is a symptom of a deep structural pathology. Think about what those foods represent. Onions, garlic, lentils, these are cheap, abundant staples. In Egypt, even the slave got fed.
Right. You don't let your farm equipment rust, and you don't let your slaves starve. It's just bad economics.
Exactly. In Egypt, their lives were terrible, yes. They were beaten, they had no rights, they saw their children killed. But, and this is the absolute key, their survival was guaranteed. They didn't have to think about where Darren was coming from. The master provided. The menu was set. Now they are in the desert.
And the desert is a meritocracy.
The desert is ruthless. In the desert, if you don't hunt, you don't eat. If you don't find water, you die. The system of providence has shifted from the pharaoh providing the food to the laws of nature demanding you work for it.
Yeah.
And they hated it.
There's this one line in the source that just stopped me cold. It says that for the slave mind, the cage becomes lawful halal and the nest becomes unlawful haram.
Let's unpack that because it completely redefines religious terminology in a socio-political context. The cage becomes halal. It means that predictability, even in slavery, feels right to them. It feels moral. It feels safe.
So lawful doesn't mean divinely permitted. It means psychologically acceptable.
Yes. And the open sky, the nest, where you have to build your own shelter and find your own food, that feels wrong. It feels dangerous. It feels illicit or haram.
That is such a psychological inversion. Usually we think of halal as good and haram as bad. But here, the slave mindset twists it so that safety in slavery is the ultimate good and risk in freedom is the ultimate evil.
The source argues that long-term subjugation destroys the kuti, the selfhood or self-respect of a people. You stop seeing yourself as a protagonist who acts on the world.
And you start seeing yourself as a dependent.
A dependent who needs the world to act on you. You become a consumer of systems, not a creator of them.
It's the difference between a zoo animal and a wild animal. The zoo animal gets fed at 5:00 km every day. It just waits by the gate.
Yeah.
The wild animal might starve for 3 days straight, but it owns its life. The Israelites, according to this analysis, wanted to go back to the zoo.
They say it explicitly. They say, we remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost.
At no cost. That is the delusion right there.
That's a delusion. They completely forgot the cost was their dignity. They forgot the cost was their freedom, their children. They only remembered the free lunch.
And this dependency, this addiction to the free lunch, it leads to the second major symptom the source identifies, the refusal to struggle.
Yes.
There is this pivotal moment in the narrative where they are told to enter the Holy Land.
Right. And again, we need to decode this. In this interpretation, the Holy Land isn't just some magical religious site. It represents statehood. It represents established authority. Sovereignty.
Yeah.
A place where they can finally make their own laws and build their own society.
Exactly. So they are told to go in and claim it. Now remember, the source emphasizes that God, in this text, represents the universal law of cause and effect. You don't get land by wishing for it.
You get it by taking it, by working for it.
But the Israelites say, and I'm paraphrasing the source here, hey, Moses, there are big, scary people in there. Giants. We aren't going in.
They actually say, go, you and your Lord, and fight. We will sit here.
We will sit here. I mean, the sheer abdication in that phrase.
It is the ultimate abdication. It's breathtakingly arrogant and lazy at the same time.
It really is.
It is the absolute definition of the slave mindset. They view freedom as a service that should be delivered to them, like a pizza.
Right. Moses, you're the leader. God is the superpower. You two go clear out the enemy, pave the roads, set up the Wi-Fi, and once it's safe and comfortable, give us a shout and we'll move in.
They wanted a turnkey revolution.
A turnkey revolution. I love that. But history doesn't work that way, does it?
No. Revolutions are messy, they're dangerous, and they require blood and sweat. And because they refuse to move, the source introduces a specific Quranic term that describes their condition, maskana.
So they refuse to fight for the Holy Land. They tell Moses, you go fight, we'll sit here. And because of this, the text says they were struck with maskana. Now, I looked this up in a standard dictionary, and it usually translates to humility or poverty, being a miskin.
Right. And in many traditional religious circles, being humble or poor is sometimes even seen as a virtue. But the source material does this linguistic forensics investigation and says, no, that is a complete mistranslation of the concept.
So what is the actual root? What are we missing?
The root word is sukun,
Sukun.
which means static, to be motionless. Think of a pool of water.
Okay, a pond.
Right. If water is flowing, a river, a stream, it's fresh, it's alive, you can drink it, it generates energy, it carves canyons. But what happens if that water stops moving? What happens if it just sits there for a month, a year?
It gets stagnant. Algae grows, mosquitoes breed, it becomes toxic. You can't drink it.
Exactly. That is maskana. It isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It is the loss of dynamic movement. A nation that has maskana is a nation that has stopped moving. They have stopped innovating, they've stopped struggling, they've stopped exploring. They are functionally paralyzed.
That totally changes the context of God's wrath. It's not that God got mad and zapped them with a poverty ray.
No, not at all.
It's that they violated the law of movement. Life is motion. If you stop moving, you start dying. It's a natural consequence.
Precisely. The punishment wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. The punishment was the inevitable mechanical consequence of stagnation. They became a standing water civilization in a world that was a rushing river. They wanted to sit here while the world moved on.
So, okay, you have this generation that's completely broken. They're addicted to the onions of slavery, and they refuse to get up and fight for their own sovereignty. What do you do with them?
That is the million-dollar question of nation building, isn't it? And the source argues the answer is brutal, but necessary.
Which is?
You have to wait for them to die.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack that. This brings us to section 2, the software update.
The source looks at the famous 40 years in the desert. Traditionally, this is viewed as a punishment. You disobeyed, so now you are lost.
Right, wandering in circles, just looking at sand dunes for 4 decades. Seems like a harsh penalty.
But our source flips it entirely. It says this wasn't a punishment, it was a strategy. It was a sociological necessity.
A strategy for what?
For generational replacement. The analysis argues that the generation that came out of Egypt was infected. Their neural pathways were set to slave mode. You could take the man out of Egypt, but you couldn't take Egypt out of the man.
They were a lost cause.
They could not be rehabilitated. They were too afraid, too dependent, too addicted to the onions. No amount of motivational speaking from Moses was going to change their fundamental programming.
So the 40 years was just a waiting game, just running out the clock on their lives.
It was more than that. It was a quarantine. The source uses the word segregation. The idea was that the new generation, the children who were born in freedom, who never knew the whip, who never tasted the free onions of Egypt, had to be raised in a totally different environment.
The school of nature.
The school of nature, the
Yeah.
desert. The desert is harsh. It demands self-reliance. If you don't hunt or find water, you die. There is no master to feed you. There is no guaranteed meal.
So it forces you to become resourceful.
It forces you to be tough. It hardens the new generation. It purges the germs of slavery from their system. It taught them how to navigate by the stars, how to fight, how to work as a team, how to survive.
So the old generation dies off, taking their slave mentality with them into the grave, and the new generation, the desert-born generation, is the one that finally has the strength and the courage to march into the Holy Land.
Correct. The source says you cannot build a new building with old, crumbling bricks. You need new material. The 40 years was the time required to manufacture those new bricks.
This is where the source makes a very direct and, frankly, very stinging comparison to the modern history of Pakistan.
Yes. And again, we are just reflecting the analysis in the text here. The source argues that the creation of Pakistan was a moment of physical liberation, very similar to the Exodus. A people got their own territory, they crossed their own Red Sea of partition.
They got the land, they got the flag.
But the argument is they failed to do the 40 years of work. They failed to segregate the new generation from the old mindset.
So they got the land, but they kept the psychology. They imported the slave mindset into the new country.
The source claims that instead of training the youth in a new school of nature, teaching them discipline, unity, and self-reliance, they raised them with the same old slave psychology. The complaining, the dependency, the sectarianism, the looking for a handout.
They basically passed the onion addiction down to the kids.
Exactly. The weeping over the onions. The source describes the modern nation as constantly weeping over its condition. Why is electricity expensive? Why is the water running out? Why isn't the government fixing everything for me? Which it frames as the exact same psychological posture as the Israelites whining to Moses.
Moses, make the water flow. Moses, get us meat from the sky.
It's the same demand for a provider, for a master. The critique is that because the psychological software update never happened, the nation remains in a state of maskana, stagnation.
It's still a standing pool of water.
And the source warns, you cannot maintain sovereignty if your people are still psychologically looking for a master to feed them. You just end up with a new master.
That is a very sobering thought.
Yeah.
It suggests that political freedom is utterly useless without psychological freedom.
The cage becomes lawful. Until the cage becomes hateful to you, you aren't really free. And if you raise your children to love the cage, you are effectively dooming your nation.
Okay, I want to pivot to section 3. This is where the source material gets really technical, but also, I think, really cool. It's titled Decoding the System.
This is the systems level synthesis. This is where the source takes these religious terms that we hear all the time and redefines them as sociopolitical concepts. It treats the text like code that needs to be deciphered.
Let's start with this story about a changed word. I want to get into this because it feels like a detective story. The source talks about the difference between hita and hinta.
Right. So to set the scene, the Israelites are being told to enter a city. They're at the gates, and they're being given a command on how to enter. There's a protocol.
A password, almost.
A password of intent. The command is to enter with humility and to say the word hita.
And hita means?
Contextually, it implies submission to the law. It's a declaration of purpose. It means we are entering this city to establish the system of justice. We are taking up the burden of the law. We are here to serve and to build.
Okay, so we're here to do the work. That's the core message.
Basically. But the text says they changed the word. They played a linguistic trick. Instead of saying hita, they shouted hinta.
Which sounds very similar.
Very similar. But hinta means wheat.
Wheat.
It means grain. Wheat. Food.
So wait, they were told to march in, saying, we accept the responsibility of building a just society, and instead they marched in shouting, give us the bread.
That's precisely it. It sounds like a prank, doesn't it? And for centuries, commentators treated it like a pronunciation error or just a moment of mockery. But our source argues this marks a fundamental, catastrophic shift in the social contract.
How so? It seems like such a small thing.
Think about modern politics. Think about an election. Do people vote for the candidate who says, I will give you hard work, discipline, and the rule of law, hita? Or do they vote for the candidate who promises, I will give you free gas, free subsidies, and cheap wheat, hinta?
They vote for the wheat. Almost always the wheat.
This is the critique. The source argues that a society collapses when its people prioritize consumption over contribution. The Israelites replaced a slogan of duty with a slogan of demand. They didn't want to build the city, they wanted to eat the city.
That is uncomfortably relevant. It's the shift from a population of citizens to a population of consumers.
And the moment a nation makes that shift, when the wheat becomes more important than the law, sovereignty is impossible because someone has to grow the wheat. And if everyone is just shouting for it, you end up borrowing it or begging for it, and then you're right back in the cage.
Where is my free lunch? It really is the slave mindset all over again, just in a different form.
Precisely. Now look at how the source redefines the staff of Moses.
The Asa. This was another mind-bender for me. I had to read this section twice.
Yes. Traditionally, the Asa is a stick, a miracle rod. Moses hits a rock, water comes out. Magic.
Right. Very cinematic, Charlton Heston style, parting the sea, the whole deal.
The source completely rejects the magic. It says that's a misreading. It looks at the linguistic root of the word. Asa is linked to asabiya.
Asabiya. That's a sociological term, isn't it? Ibn Khaldun used it.
Yes, the great historian Ibn Khaldun. It means social cohesion, group unity, the bond of a community. It's the glue that holds a tribe or a nation together.
So when the text says strike with your asa, it doesn't mean hit it with a wooden stick.
The source interprets it as take your community, mobilize your group strength, and striking the rock. It implies hard labor. It implies engineering, digging, problem solving.
Whoa, that completely changes the scene.
It does. It changes it from a wizard casting a spell to a leader mobilizing a workforce to dig through mountainous terrain to find water aquifers.
Strike the rock with your community. So it's a command to work, to engineer a solution to your own problems.
Yes. The source argues that God doesn't run a magic show for humanity. He runs a universe of cause and effect. If you want water in a desert, you don't wave a wand. You organize your people, asa, and you dig, strike the rock. You use your collective strength to solve the problem.
That makes the next part of the story even more interesting and more tragic. The 12 springs.
Ah, yes, the fragmentation.
So the story goes the 12 springs gushed out. Traditionally, this is seen as a blessing. Look, God provided a spring for every single tribe. How nice and convenient.
But the source reads it as a complete and utter tragedy.
A tragedy. Why?
Because it represents the failure of unity.
Right?
Why did they need 12 separate springs?
Because there were 12 tribes.
Exactly.
Right.
Because they refused to share. They refused to integrate into one nation, one ummah. Each tribe demanded, "Where is my water? I'm not drinking from their spring. I'm from the tribe of Judah. I don't drink with the tribe of Levi."
It's segregation. It's internal apartheid over a water cooler.
It is sectarianism in its purest form, and the source calls this structural shirk.
Okay, shirk usually means polytheism, believing in multiple gods. How does that connect?
Right, but here, the gods are the tribes themselves, the sects, the political parties. By dividing the ummah, the community, into competing parties with competing loyalties, they are setting up competing authorities against the single divine law.
So each tribe becomes its own little god, demanding its own resources.
The source argues that a unified nation drinks from one river. A fractured, slave-minded nation demands 12 little puddles so they don't have to look at each other.
That is a scathing critique of sectarianism. It's not just unfortunate or divisive. The source is saying it's a violation of the system's core design. It weakens the essa, the social bond.
And this fragmentation, this refusal to work together, it leads to the punishment. The text mentions riz,
Riz. I want to define this clearly because the image it creates is so visceral.
often translated as a plague sent from the sky, or some kind of heavenly wrath.
Right. Lightning bolts, locusts, frogs, that sort of thing. The Hollywood version.
But the source, again, goes to the etymological root. Riz refers to a specific pathology in camels. It's a disease where the camel's legs begin to tremble uncontrollably and it can no longer stand up.
Purmling legs.
It's a loss of stability. It loses its foundation. So applied to a nation, Riz isn't a magical lightning bolt. It is psychological paralysis. It is moral cowardice.
So the punishment for their refusal to struggle, their obsession with onions, and their sectarian division was that they literally lost the ability to stand on their own feet.
They became a trembling nation.
A nation that trembles before its enemies, that trembles before its economic challenges, that trembles before the World Bank. They collapse under their own weight because they have no inner stability. That is the Riz.
It's internal weakness manifesting as external collapse. It's not a punishment inflicted from outside. It's a disease that rots from within.
This connects so perfectly to the next section, the universal laws of rise and fall.
Yeah.
Because if these aren't magical punishments, but natural mechanical consequences, that means they apply to everyone.
That is the headline of Section 4. God is not tribal.
The source makes a huge point about this. It asks a really provocative question. Does God favor religious people?
And the answer it gives is a resounding no. The source states God is Rab-ul-Alamin, the Lord of all worlds, of all peoples. He is not the tribal chieftain of the Muslims or the Israelites or the Christians. He is the sustainer of the entire system.
This is a tough pill to swallow for any group that thinks we are the chosen ones.
The source explicitly attacks that delusion. It says both the ancient Israelites and many modern religious groups fall into this exact trap. They think, we are God's children, we are the favorites. So we get paradise, we get success, even if we are lazy, even if we are corrupt, even if we don't dig for water.
God will bail us out because we have the right label on our jersey.
Exactly. And the source says, nature doesn't care about your labor. Nature cares about your inputs. Nature is a machine. It's impartial.
This leads to the distinction between physical laws and moral laws. This was probably the most practical and, for some people, maybe the most controversial part of the source for me.
It is absolutely critical. The source distinguishes two domains. One is physical laws. This is science, engineering, organization, agriculture, how the material world works. The other is moral laws, justice, equity, unity, how society works.
And here's the hard truth the source delivers. You can achieve worldly success by just following the physical laws.
Yes. The source specifically references modern Israel, the state. It notes that non-believers or people outside the faith of the speaker succeeded in turning deserts into gardens. Why?
Not because of their theology, not because God liked them more.
No, because they respected the physical laws. They used drip irrigation, they used agronomy, they worked hard, they organized effectively, they engineered solutions. The source has this brilliant line. It says, an injection given by a Hindu doctor works the same as one given by a Muslim doctor.
Nature doesn't check the doctor's religion before allowing the medicine to work. It checks the chemical formula in the syringe.
Precisely. If a believer prays all day but ignores the laws of agriculture, his crop will die. If a non-believer ignores prayer but follows the laws of agriculture meticulously, his crop will grow. The source argues that the religious world often failed because they thought ritual could replace science.
They tried to pray for the water instead of striking the rock with engineering and teamwork. They treated the universe like a magical kingdom with a whimsical king, instead of a system of immutable laws.
And that is a fundamental violation of the system. You cannot cheat the laws of the universe. The source says if you ignore the physical laws, you will remain poor and dependent. If you ignore the moral laws, you might get rich for a while, but your society will eventually eat itself through greed and injustice. You need both to build something that lasts.
So if that's the case, what is the role of faith? What is iman? Because if I can just be a good engineer and succeed, why do I need faith at all?
This brings us to another major redefinition of terms. The source argues iman is almost always mistranslated as blind faith.
Right. Believing without seeing, just taking a leap in the dark.
The source completely rejects that. It redefines iman as rational conviction.
Rational conviction. That sounds almost like a contradiction in terms to how we usually hear it.
It involves two things: dalil, which is evidence, and aql, which is intellect or reason. Iman is the state of mind you reach after you have reasoned through the evidence. It's not about closing your eyes. It's about opening them as wide as possible.
So it's the end point of a logical process, not the starting point of a mystical one.
It is the conviction that the law of cause and effect is true, and that the moral laws laid out in the system will lead to societal flourishing. It's the conviction that the blueprint works.
So having iman means being absolutely convinced that if I follow the system, the result will happen. Like a farmer who plants a seed. He has faith it will grow, not because of magic, but because he understands the laws of botany and he trusts them.
That is a perfect analogy. That is iman. It is certainty based on understanding the law, and this connects directly to salah.
Which is 9 times out of 10 translated as ritual prayer, 5 times a day, facing a certain direction.
The source defines salah, specifically the Quranic phrase iqamat al-salah, as the establishment of a system.
Establishment implies building something solid, something structural.
You don't establish a dance or a chant. You establish a government. You establish a court of justice. You establish an economic system. The source argues that salah is the social order that protects and nurtures the community's development. And here is the real kicker. You cannot establish salah without tamkin.
Tomkin, what's that?
Sovereign authority, state power.
So you're saying you can't just pray in your basement and claim you've established the system.
That's what the source claims. It says, without a state to enforce justice, to manage resources, to protect the weak from the strong, salah is just a private hobby. To establish the system, you need the power to execute the law.
That turns religion from a personal set of rituals into a political manifesto for building a state.
It does. It frames it as a civilizational operating system. You need the hardware, the state, the authority to run the software, which is the moral law.
Okay, this brings us to Section 5, the concept of prophethood. If this is all about rational laws and building systems, what is a prophet? Is he a fortune teller? Is he a magician? Because that's the popular image we get.
And the source vehemently rejects the fortune teller definition. It absolutely hates the idea of prophets as magicians or soothsayers.
So no crystal balls, no reading tea leaves.
None of that. The source uses a beautiful metaphor to explain it: the vantage point.
The vantage point.
Imagine a man standing on a high mountain peak, and down below there is a caravan traveling through a valley.
Okay, I can picture that.
The man on the mountain sees a dust cloud on the horizon miles away. He can see it's an enemy army approaching to ambush the caravan. The people in the valley, they can't see it.
Right, their view is blocked by the hills, by their immediate surroundings. They're just focused on the path in front of them.
So the man on the mountain shouts down, "One, get out of the valley, the enemy is coming." Now, is he using magic? Is he predicting the future?
No, he just has a better view, a higher perspective.
Exactly. He has a higher vantage point. The source argues that revelation, wahi, gives the prophet a higher vantage point on the laws of history and society. He sees the long-term consequences of actions before the common people do.
So when a prophet warns a nation, if you continue this path of injustice and division, you will be destroyed in 3 generations. He's not casting a spell. He's predicting the inevitable outcome of a broken law.
He's like a physicist telling you that if you drop an apple, it will fall. It's not magic, it's an understanding of the law. He sees the army coming from the mountain. It's information, not magic. This is why the source is so critical of the superstitious stories that get attached to prophets.
Like the naked Moses story.
We have to touch on that.
Please explain this. I read it in the notes and I did a double take. It sounds completely bizarre.
So there is a traditional story found in some exegesis, not the Quran itself, that claims the Israelites accused Moses of having a physical defect, some kind of disease. So God wanted to clear his name.
Okay, a strange premise, but go on.
The story goes that Moses was bathing in a river and he put his clothes on a rock. And the rock ran away with his clothes.
The rock ran away.
The rock grew legs or just started rolling with his clothes on top, and Moses had to chase the rock completely naked past all the assembled Israelites. And when they saw him, they all said, "Oh, look, he's physically healthy, no defects," and his name was cleared.
That is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard.
The source agrees. It calls this a fabrication, an absurdity. It dismisses it as a story likely invented by the Israelites themselves to annoy and humiliate their leader, Moses.
It sounds like something a group of rebellious teenagers would make up to prank their teacher. Let's spread a rumor the principal's clothes ran away.
Exactly. But the source's point is much deeper than just calling out a silly story. It asks, why do we clutter a rational, revolutionary text about building a just society with fairy tales about running rocks?
Because it degrades the entire message.
It degrades the intellect. If you believe rocks run away with clothes, you are not in a mental state to understand the laws of history or the laws of physics. You are not a builder.
You are back in the mystical mindset, not the rational conviction mindset.
And if you are in the mystical mindset, you cannot build a sovereign state. You will wait for a magical rock to save you instead of building a dam. You will wait for a miracle instead of striking the rock with your own collective labor.
This brings us to the outro. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from the caged bird to the trembling legs of Riz.
We certainly have.
Let's try to summarize this civilizational operating system that the source is proposing. It seems to have 3 main steps, a kind of logical flow.
It does. Step 1 is iman.
But redefined as rational conviction.
Yes. The intellectual acceptance, based on reason and evidence, that the universe runs on laws, both moral and physical, and that those laws are unbreakable. You have to believe in the system itself.
Okay, so that's the foundation, step 2.
Salah.
But redefined as system establishment, not just prayer.
Right, taking that conviction and building a collective structure, a state, that embodies and enforces those laws. Organizing the community, taking your staff in hand, moving from chaos to order.
And step 3, the final piece,
Infer.
which usually means spending or charity.
In the system's view, it is economic sacrifice and reinvestment. It is the fuel for the system. It is the proof of your iman. You are willing to give up your immediate resources, your onions, to invest in the long-term struggle to build the garden. You reinvest your surplus back into the society to strengthen it.
So, rational conviction plus state building plus economic sacrifice equals sovereignty.
That is the formula the source lays out.
And the alternative, what's the warning?
The alternative is the warning the source leaves us with. Mukafari amal, the mechanism of action. Which means consequences are mechanical, they are automatic. The source says God does not play favorites. If a nation allows itself to become stagnant, maskana. If it clings to the cage, if it fractures into sects, if it demands wheat instead of law,
then no amount of prayer will save it.
No amount of ritual prayer will save it. The source is absolutely brutal on this point. You violate the laws of life, you will be replaced. You will be pushed aside by another people who do follow the laws of nature and effort, even if those people don't share your theology. History has a recycling bin, and stagnant nations go into it.
That brings us right back to the bird at the beginning.
It does. It all comes back to that.
The door is open. The sky is right there. But the instinct, the rewired instinct, is to peck at the cage, to run after the master.
And the source is essentially asking the listener, and all of us, which instinct will you follow? The comfort of the cage, the onions, the garlic, the guaranteed low-level survival, or the terrifying, demanding, but ultimately magnificent open sky of sovereignty?
The cage becomes lawful, and the nest becomes unlawful.
Let's hope we can reverse that equation, because the sky is waiting.
Indeed. It's a heavy choice,
Yeah.
but it's the only one that really matters in the long run.
It is.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this. This was a true deep dive.
My pleasure. It's a text that demands we think, not just, passively believe.
And to you listening, are you building a nest, or are you just decorating your cage? Something to think about. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.